July 10th, 2026. The Islamic Republic planned this night as a demonstration of unity, a funeral procession carrying the body of its former supreme leader through the streets of Mashhad, broadcast live on state media. Thousands gathered. The next supreme leader making a public appearance to project continuity and command authority to a nation and a watching world that has been asking the same question for months. Who is actually running Iran? The answer they got tonight was not the one they planned to give. Gunfire erupted at IRGC checkpoints across Mashhad. 3 Revolutionary Guards confirmed dead at one checkpoint. A second checkpoint struck. The Islamic Republic state media cut the live broadcast. The current supreme leader, who had reportedly promised to make an appearance at his own father's burial, was nowhere to be found because the IRGC itself told him not to come. The same institution that was deployed across Mashhad to secure the funeral concluded that the man at the top of the Iranian chain of command could not be safely present at the ceremony his own security apparatus was protecting. And while the shots were still being reported from Mashhad's streets, Bahrain and Kuwait were striking Iranian territory from across the Gulf. Not the Americans, not the Israelis, the Arabs. Let's back all the way up, because to understand what tonight represents, you need to understand that the Islamic Republic did not just lose a funeral. It lost something far more consequential, and the evidence is scattered across the geography of a country that is being hit from directions it never believed it would be hit from, on a night it believed would be its moment to demonstrate that it was still standing. The context runs deep. For decades, the Islamic Republic's strategic survival model rested on a specific regional architecture. Keep the Gulf states intimidated, keep them divided, keep them uncertain enough about the costs of confrontation that they would choose accommodation over opposition. The proxy network, Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Houthis in Yemen, the militia infrastructure threaded through Iraq and Syria, was not just about projecting Iranian power outward. It was about projecting a cost inward toward any Gulf Arab state that might consider making itself an enemy rather than an uncomfortable neighbor. The Strait of Hormuz was the physical instrument of this leverage. Control the choke point, tax the world's shipping. Make the price of opposing Iran too high to contemplate. Tonight, Kuwait struck Iranian territory. Bahrain struck Iranian territory. And a funeral that was supposed to project regime continuity was cut off mid-broadcast because armed attackers were moving against IRGC checkpoints in the streets outside. The architecture failed, every pillar of it, on the same night, in front of the world. Here is exactly what happened, location by location, because the geography of tonight's attacks tells a strategic story that cannot be conveyed by the individual place names alone. Chabahar, in the southeastern province of Sistan and Baluchistan, was struck tonight. The United States military denied involvement. Israel denied involvement. Iranian state media attributed the strikes to Kuwait and Bahrain. Chabahar is Iran's only deepwater port with direct maritime access to the Indian Ocean, the single facility in the entire Iranian maritime architecture that bypasses the Strait of Hormuz entirely. American forces struck Chabahar heavily the previous night. Tonight, the Arab states struck it again. The control tower at the facility has been photographed following the strikes, and the structural damage to the operational sections is extensive. The right side of the tower, where the control room was based, appears to have absorbed the primary impact. The tower itself was not fully collapsed, but the operational infrastructure inside it is, by available visual evidence, gone. Chabahar has been struck on consecutive nights by 2 different sets of actors. It is no longer a functioning maritime outlet for the Islamic Republic by any reasonable operational assessment. Konarak, also in Sistan and Baluchistan province and located in close geographic proximity to Chabahar, was hit by missile strikes tonight targeting an IRGC naval facility. This was confirmed by the Islamic Republic's own official news agency, which attributed the attack to what it called the enemy without naming the specific actors, its standard formulaic evasion for acknowledging damage it cannot deny. The Arab states are the operational attribution. The IRGC Navy in Sistan and Baluchistan is being systematically eliminated along the southeastern coastline in a pattern of consecutive night operations that has now involved both American and Arab state military assets. Ahvaz, in the southwestern province near the Iraqi border. Here tonight produced something different from an airstrike. Ali Razaradi, identified as an advisor to the provincial command structure and connected to the Vali Asr forces of the IRGC in Ahvaz, was the target of an assassination. The explosion was initially reported as a gas leak by the local fire department, who issued a statement attributing the blast to a gas pipe failure in a residential building in the area. The Islamic Republic reached for this explanation within minutes of the event, and this is where the gas leak explanation reveals something beyond its immediate absurdity. That the Iranian government now reflexively issues gas leak statements every time something explodes in proximity to an IRGC official or facility tells you that the regime has made a strategic calculation that the domestic audience is more manageable with implausible cover stories than with honest acknowledgement of the operational reality. The fire department retracted the statement. The assassination targeting of Razaradi was confirmed through subsequent reporting. His condition remains unacknowledged by the Islamic Republic, which is itself confirmation of the kind of outcome that produces silence rather than correction. Bushehr, in the southwest. The deputy governor of Bushehr province, Ihsan Junan, issued a statement tonight confirming that a military headquarters on the outskirts of the city had been struck by a projectile. Drone or missile attribution is unconfirmed. What is confirmed is that Bushehr has been struck on consecutive nights. The previous night's strikes were attributed to American forces, tonight's to the Arab states. Bushehr sits in geographic proximity to Karg Island, the facility that handles approximately 95% of Iranian oil exports, and that remains under explicit discussion as a potential future target or seizure objective by the United States. The sustained attention to Bushehr in this campaign is not coincidental. Kerman. This location carries significance beyond the military target itself because Kerman sits deep inside Iranian territory, well outside the coastal zones that have been the primary operational theater for both American and Arab state strikes up to this point. The targeting of Kerman represents a geographic expansion of the campaign into the Iranian interior. Previous operations concentrated on the coastline, on the naval facilities, on the ports, on the radar and air defense infrastructure along Iran's maritime perimeter. Kerman is not on the perimeter. Kerman is inland, and striking it signals that the operational conception of this campaign is not constrained by the geographic logic that defined its earlier phases. Iran Shah Airport was also struck last night and reported on earlier. The United States military confirmed non-involvement, placing it within the Arab state operational pattern. And then Shiraz. At approximately 7 o'clock local time this evening, missiles struck the city of Shiraz. Brigadier General Ibrahim Mortazavi Nesp was killed. A general officer of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, eliminated in his city by a strike that the IRGC cannot attribute to an external military power, without acknowledging that Arab states are now conducting command-level targeting operations against IRGC general officers inside Iranian territory. That is the operational fact that Mortazavi Nesp's death establishes tonight, and it sits alongside the 3 confirmed IRGC deaths in Mashhad and the targeted assassination attempt against Razaradi in Ahvaz to produce a single-night casualty picture across the IRGC's command and security structure that has no recent precedent in this conflict. Now let's talk about the attacks in Mashhad directly, because the funeral operation requires its own full analytical treatment. The Immortal Guard of Iran, one of the resistance formations that has been operating against the IRGC within Iranian territory, has been named among those potentially responsible for the checkpoint attacks. Ethnic resistance groups from the eastern parts of the country have also been identified as possible actors. The distinction between these groups matters less than the operational fact of what happened. Armed elements moved against multiple IRGC checkpoints in a city that was, for this one night, the most heavily secured location in the Islamic Republic. The IRGC deployed across Mashhad to protect a funeral attended by the entire senior leadership of the regime. Every checkpoint was an IRGC position. Every checkpoint was therefore a legitimate target within the operational logic of the resistance forces that chose this night to act. At least one checkpoint saw 3 confirmed IRGC deaths. A second was struck. Reports from unverified but multiple sources suggest the total death toll in Mashhad is higher, with figures of 5 and 6 being circulated. The Islamic Republic's state media has not reported the capture or killing of the attackers. That silence is confirmation of a specific operational outcome. When a security apparatus successfully neutralizes an attacker, it announces it. The announcement serves the regime's authority projection. The absence of that announcement means the regime cannot make it, which means the attackers completed their operation and are not in IRGC custody. They came, they struck, they left. On the night the Islamic Republic was burying its former supreme leader, and the current supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, was not there. Read that with its full weight, because it is the single detail from tonight that will define how this moment is remembered. Every surviving son of Ali Khamenei attended the funeral in Mashhad. The rest of the senior leadership of the Islamic Republic was present. The clerical hierarchy was there. The political figures were there. The institutional faces of the regime made the journey to Mashhad and stood at the ceremony of the man who led Iran for decades. The one person who did not come was the current supreme leader, his own father's burial, and he was kept away not by his own choice, not by a health issue, not by a prior commitment, but because the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the institution that exists to protect supreme leadership, assessed the security situation in Mashhad and concluded that the supreme leader of the Islamic Republic could not safely attend the funeral in a city ringed with IRGC checkpoints. The IRGC was right. The checkpoint attacks confirmed that assessment. But the implication is more devastating than the accuracy of the security advice. If the IRGC cannot protect the supreme leader at a funeral surrounded by its own security perimeter in Mashhad, in the northeastern interior of the country, at the single most security-intensive event the Iranian state has conducted in recent memory, then the question of what the IRGC can guarantee about the safety of senior leadership anywhere becomes the central operational question of the regime's existence. The invisible supreme leader is invisible not because of mysterious strategic calculation. He is invisible because the institution that should be able to protect him has told him that showing his face is too dangerous. That is the state of the Islamic Republic on July 10, 2026. Now let's examine the Iranian military response to a night that included the killing of one of its general officers, armed attacks on its checkpoints during its supreme leader's funeral, and coordinated Arab state strikes from the Gulf across multiple cities simultaneously. Iran struck Bahrain. 2 locations in Bahrain were targeted. Additionally, strike attempts were directed at Jordan, Kuwait, and Qatar. Every strike against Kuwait, Jordan, and Qatar was intercepted. Everything launched at those 3 countries was neutralized before reaching its target. The only Iranian kinetic action that registered tonight was 2 strikes in Bahrain, and those strikes were directed at what Iran claimed were military targets. But what the pattern of IRGC targeting in this conflict consistently reveals to be civilian infrastructure and residential areas. The Bahrain Defense Force has already formally confirmed that Iran's attacks have been systematic and deliberately directed at civilian targets rather than military ones. This is the IRGC's doctrine in action, not the doctrine it announces in press conferences. The doctrine it actually executes: civilian neighborhoods, residential towers, commercial airports. And the logic behind this doctrine is worth understanding fully, because it explains why the regime keeps doing it, even as it produces the opposite of the strategic effect it is supposed to generate. The theory behind civilian targeting as a tool of coercion is that governments of targeted countries will respond to public pressure from their populations, rather than continuing military operations that produce civilian casualties. The population suffers. The population demands its government stop whatever triggered the strikes. The government backs down. The IRGC achieves through terror what it cannot achieve through military confrontation. This model worked for decades in the proxy architecture. Hezbollah rocket campaigns against Israeli civilian populations created genuine pressure. Houthi missile campaigns against Saudi civilian infrastructure created genuine pressure. The model has a track record in certain contexts. The context it does not work in is one where the targeted population's government has already concluded that continued accommodation of the IRGC produces worse outcomes than continued military response. Kuwait and Bahrain are not backing down under civilian targeting. They are escalating their own operations against IRGC facilities on Iranian soil. The coercive model has been inverted. The threat that was supposed to intimidate is instead producing the military mobilization it was designed to prevent. And the IRGC, lacking both the strategic coherence and the command authority to change course, is continuing the civilian targeting doctrine because it is what the institutional playbook says to do, regardless of whether the current context makes it effective. The interception record tells you what the Arab states' air defense posture looks like after years of American training and system integration. Jordan, Kuwait, and Qatar all successfully intercepted incoming Iranian threats tonight. The contrast with earlier in this conflict, when Kuwaiti air defense systems experienced significant operational failures during the 40-day war, and even produced incidents where Kuwaiti assets accidentally engaged American aircraft operating in defense of Kuwait, is stark. The Kuwaiti air defense that was struggling to distinguish friend from adversary in the early weeks of this campaign is now successfully intercepting Iranian strikes, while simultaneously conducting offensive operations against IRGC positions on Iranian soil. The trajectory of that capability development is itself a strategic message. The Arab states are not the same military actors they were when this confrontation began. Now let's address what the Iran state media operation tonight reveals about where the regime believes its available leverage actually sits. Iranian state media broadcast footage showing crowds holding signs offering a $100 million reward for the killing of the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Israel, and 2 additional American officials. The signs named specific individuals. The reward figure was explicit. The broadcast carried English subtitles. This was not domestic messaging conducted in Farsi for an Iranian audience that already hates these figures. The English subtitles indicate the intended audience includes the outside world. This is a psychological operation running on international frequencies. The regime cannot stop the strikes. It cannot prevent the Arab states from conducting offensive operations against its territory. It cannot keep its general officers alive in Shiraz. It cannot guarantee the safety of its supreme leader at a funeral. What it can do is broadcast a $100 million bounty on camera and dare the world to react. The production quality and the explicit targeting of named individuals with specific reward amounts tells you that the Islamic Republic has made a strategic decision that it has nothing left to lose by escalating the public threat posture against Western and Allied leadership. That decision is not the decision of a government that believes it is winning, or that believes it has credible military options left for the confrontation it is in. It is the decision of a government reaching for any instrument that might change the external pressure it is under, because the instruments it was counting on have been found insufficient. The three simultaneous pressure tracks converging on the Islamic Republic tonight are producing a compounding effect that each track alone could not generate, and the compounding is accelerating as the Arab state entry multiplies the military pressure in ways the IRGC was not resourced to absorb. The financial track remains at maximum intensity. The revocation of Iran's general oil sales license removes the primary legitimate revenue mechanism at the exact moment Chabahar, the alternative maritime outlet that bypasses the Strait of Hormuz, has been struck on consecutive nights and is no longer operational. The regime cannot sell its oil legally, and the port it would use to route it outside the strait is gone as a functional asset. The financial timeline for the Islamic Republic is running on a clock that its remaining revenue streams cannot reset. What remains is black market oil sales, cryptocurrency channels, and the kind of sanctions evasion that generates a fraction of the revenue the legitimate license provided. The IRGC generals sitting in hardened facilities are not personally suffering from this financial compression, not immediately. But the operational budgets that fund the IRGC's capabilities, the drone production, the missile stockpiles, the proxy force payments, the fuel for the fast attack boats that are already being eliminated from the water, all of those operational costs run against a treasury that is bleeding out in real time. The military track expanded tonight in two simultaneous directions. American operations pushed deeper into Iranian territory, with Kerman struck in the interior beyond the coastal zone that has defined the campaign's geographic logic until now. Arab state operations opened a second active military front that the IRGC's deterrence architecture was designed to make strategically inconceivable. The IRGC spent decades building the psychological and operational framework to keep Gulf Arab states out of direct military confrontation. That framework has now been called and found insufficient. Bahrain and Kuwait did not call it insufficient in a diplomatic note or a UN speech. They called it insufficient by launching strikes against IRGC naval facilities in the southeastern province of Sistan and Baluchistan and against military headquarters in Bushehr. The falsification of Iran's deterrence model against the Arab states is now an operational fact, recorded in target damage assessments across multiple Iranian cities, confirmed by Iranian state media's own attribution of the strikes to Kuwait and Bahrain. The psychological track found its most powerful image tonight in a chair that was empty, metaphorically speaking, at a funeral that the entire regime attended, except for the one person whose attendance was most symbolically important. The state media broadcast that cut out mid-funeral, the IRGC checkpoints that fell under fire during the most security-intensive event the Islamic Republic has conducted in recent memory. The brigadier general dead in Shiraz at 7 in the evening. The intercepted strikes against Kuwait, Jordan, and Qatar landing nowhere. And the $100 million bounty broadcast on state media as the most visible instrument of power the regime could display when its military instruments are producing the results tonight has produced. Every one of these images tells the Iranian domestic audience, the IRGC rank and file, the middle tier of regime officials who are watching the situation and calculating whether their institutional future lies with the current leadership or with whatever comes next, that the command authority at the top is not what it was. That calculation, running simultaneously across every level of the Iranian state, is the psychological pressure track operating beneath the visible kinetic exchange. Now let's go inside the command structure, because the question of who is actually directing Iranian decision-making tonight is the most consequential and most unresolved element of everything happening. Mojtaba Khamenei has been functionally invisible for well over 4 months. He holds the title of Supreme Leader. He does not exercise the public functions of that office in any observable way. He did not attend his own father's burial. The IRGC advised him not to come to Mashhad, and he accepted that advice, which tells you the nature of the relationship between the current nominal supreme leader and the military institution that is supposed to serve under his command. An institution whose commander-in-chief accepts its security advice to the extent of staying home from his father's funeral is not an institution operating under robust civilian command authority. It is an institution that has effectively assumed the role of determining what is and is not safe for the nominal leadership to do. That is not a chain of command. That is a reversal of the chain of command. Below the level of the absent supreme leader, the IRGC command is not operating as a unified strategic body. It is operating as a collection of competing institutional interests where individual commanders are issuing public statements demonstrating their hardline credentials and pursuing operational logic that serves their institutional position rather than a coherent strategic direction from above. The result is military action that cannot be stopped because no single authority has both the formal command power and the operational credibility to impose a ceasefire on the generals who are running the actual operations. Each commander is watching what the others announce and calibrating his own posture to demonstrate he is not the weakest voice in the room. This is not strategic decision-making. This is institutional politics being conducted in the language of military action. And the consequences of that dynamic are arriving in Bahrain, in Kuwait, in Qatar, and in the IRGC's own facilities across Iran simultaneously on the same night. And the United States is watching all of it. When CENTCOM officials state they were not involved in tonight's strikes on Chabahar, Konarak, and Bushehr, the accurate translation of that statement requires precision. American platforms did not deliver the munitions that struck those targets tonight, but CENTCOM maintains continuous operational awareness of everything entering and exiting Iranian airspace. Arab state military operations in this theater proceed with notification to and coordination with CENTCOM because the American military presence in the region is the operational framework within which all Allied military action is conducted. The green light for Gulf state operations against Iranian territory passes through a chain of communication that includes American command authority. When the Americans say it wasn't them, they are describing the specific operational fact of who launched the weapons. They are not describing the broader framework of coordination, intelligence sharing, and operational approval within which those weapons were launched. The distinction matters for attribution, but not for the strategic reality it represents. Qatar and Pakistan remain the regime's most important external diplomatic supports, and their continued involvement in ceasefire mediation is the mechanism the Islamic Republic is using to try to create breathing room in the current operational tempo. Qatar is in an extraordinary position, having been targeted by Iranian strikes that were subsequently intercepted, while simultaneously maintaining its role as a channel for ceasefire negotiations on behalf of the Iranian government. Pakistan has maintained its relationship with Iran without itself becoming a target of IRGC military action, likely because the IRGC has correctly calculated that Pakistan's nuclear status makes it a uniquely dangerous country to antagonize. These two relationships are not strategic assets for the regime. They are the remaining threads holding the regime's external diplomatic architecture together. Without Qatar and Pakistan, the Islamic Republic would have no viable channel through which to negotiate any kind of accommodation with the coalition currently striking it. The American posture, with officials publicly stating preparations for weeks of continued operations and everything needed already in position, carries a dual message worth examining. The stated operational intent is genuine. The force package in the region is configured for extended operations, not a short demonstrative campaign. But the pattern of this conflict has been that public declarations of extended operational commitment are followed by brokered, short-term ceasefire arrangements, which then break down when IRGC commanders resume operations that the political leadership nominally agreed to pause. The announcement of weeks-long readiness is therefore also a signal that the conditions under which a short-term pause becomes available are being communicated to Qatar and Pakistan as potential intermediaries. Whether any brokered arrangement can hold this time, given the acceleration of Arab state involvement and the killing of a brigadier general in Shiraz tonight, is a different and more difficult question than whether the arrangement will be attempted. The Trump-Netanyahu call confirmed tonight adds the Turkey dimension to a strategic picture that is already complex enough without it. The Prime Minister raised with the President concerns about statements made by Turkey's leader regarding the destruction of the Jewish state. Turkey has been establishing and pursuing military positioning in Syria that places potential future Turkish military infrastructure in geographic proximity to Israel's borders. The public disclosure of this specific topic being raised between Trump and Netanyahu is deliberate diplomatic signaling directed at Ankara. It says the conversation happened, both parties are aligned in their concern, and Turkey should not mistake American management of the relationship for American indifference to Turkish ambitions in Syria or Turkish statements about Israel. The medium and long-term Turkey question sits behind the immediate Iran campaign, but is not disconnected from it. The degradation of IRGC proxy infrastructure across the region creates strategic space that multiple actors, Turkey among them, are watching and calculating how to use. The honest strategic assessment of tonight is this. The Islamic Republic of Iran entered July 10, 2026, intending to use the burial of Ali Khamenei as a demonstration of institutional continuity and command authority. The funeral was supposed to show the world a regime that had transitioned its supreme leadership and remained functional, coherent, and capable of projecting state authority. The procession from Karbala in Iraq to Mashhad in the northeastern corner of Iran was choreographed. The gathering of the regime's senior leadership was organized. The live state media broadcast was prepared. Every element of the event was designed to produce a single message. The Islamic Republic endures. The succession is legitimate, and the institution continues. What the night produced instead was a broadcast that had to be cut when the IRGC checkpoints came under fire. a supreme leader who could not safely attend his own father's burial, a brigadier general killed in Shiraz, an IRGC official targeted for assassination in Ahvaz under a cover story the regime couldn't maintain for more than minutes, Arab state missiles striking Chabahar and Konarak and Bushehr, Kerman struck in the interior, and a retaliatory response against Gulf states in which everything directed at Kuwait, Jordan, and Qatar was intercepted. The message the regime intended to send was overwhelmed by the message the night actually delivered. The gap between those two messages is the size of the strategic problem the Islamic Republic now faces. This is the thing that matters, beyond the individual strike counts and the casualty figures, and the geographic expansion of the campaign into the Iranian interior. The regime's ability to project its own narrative, to construct the picture of itself that it wants domestic and international audiences to receive, has been operationally disrupted. The live broadcast cut out. The supreme leader was absent. The state media gas leak explanation lasted minutes before being retracted. The $100 million bounty signs are the regime's attempt to maintain an aggressive public image in the only domain where it still has some control, the domain of statement and symbol, because the operational domain is producing results tonight that no statement can reframe. Qatar and Pakistan remain the regime's most important external diplomatic supports, and their continued involvement in ceasefire mediation is the mechanism the Islamic Republic is using to try to create breathing room in the current operational tempo. Qatar is in an extraordinary position, having been targeted by Iranian strikes that were subsequently intercepted, while simultaneously maintaining its role as a channel for ceasefire negotiations on behalf of the Iranian government. The Qatari establishment's decision to absorb Iranian strike attempts and continue mediating on Iran's behalf is difficult to explain through any conventional strategic logic, which tells you that the relationships involved are operating on calculations that go beyond the immediate military exchange. Pakistan has maintained its relationship with Iran without becoming a target of IRGC military action, and that calculation on the IRGC's part reflects the specific deterrent weight of a nuclear-armed state, regardless of conventional military power comparisons. Without these two relationships, the Islamic Republic's remaining diplomatic architecture for finding any kind of off-ramp from the current confrontation effectively ceases to exist. The structural risk that matters most going forward is the gap between what the Islamic Republic can still do and what it can coherently decide to do. It can still launch drones and missiles. It can still strike civilian infrastructure in Bahrain. It can still broadcast $100 million bounty signs on state media with English subtitles. What it cannot do is direct those capabilities through a unified command authority with a visible supreme leader capable of making binding decisions and imposing them on IRGC commanders who are running their own operational track. The regime has capacity without command coherence. That specific combination, enough remaining capability to continue the conflict, but not enough unified direction to end it or escalate it in a strategically rational way, is the most dangerous state for any government to be in. It means the conflict continues on momentum rather than decision. It means the next strike or the next drone launch may not reflect a strategic calculation by anyone with authority to make binding decisions. It may simply reflect what an IRGC commander decided was the hardest possible line he could hold tonight. And somewhere in that gap between capacity and command, between the strikes that are still arriving and the invisible leader who cannot show his face, lies the most important unanswered question of this conflict. Who in Iran can actually end it? The funeral in Mashhad is over. The burial is done. Ali Khamenei is in the ground in the city where his security checkpoints were attacked during his own burial ceremony. The IRGC members who died at those checkpoints died at the one event where the entire regime was supposed to be demonstrating that the Islamic Republic remains capable of protecting itself and projecting power. The attackers appear to have gotten away. The supreme leader didn't come. The brigadier general in Shiraz is dead. And Bahrain and Kuwait, states that spent years as targets of IRGC intimidation, struck Iranian military facilities tonight with their own weapons. The regime planned this night as a demonstration of survival. What it produced instead was a map of every vulnerability it has been trying to hide. The night is still young in Tehran. The Arab state assets are still in the air. And the question hanging over every IRGC checkpoint still standing in Mashhad is the same question that has been building since the shots first fired. Who is giving the orders? And is anyone who has the authority to give different ones anywhere near a position to give them? The funeral ended. The accounting has not.